So he's not on that.
Yes.
Right. Just
Good.
Yep.
Finally, you can access. So we will also invite the 그냥 얘기하면 돼요. 마이크.
네.
I think we're good. Yeah. So, good afternoon, and we're going to everyone joining us from different part of the world, in person, but also online. Welcome to this hybrid session on the Global Index, Performance in Africa, the Global Green Growth Week 2024. My name is Malan Kafan, I'm the African Director of the and I have the privilege of being in the association today. So over the next 9 months, we will look into African progress in green growth, showcasing the latest data-driven insights and collaboration we have so far. Together, we will explore the Africa performance in sustainability, hear about, listen and learn from the different regions, especially for the least development country as well, and gain insight into regional economies like Zambia and also green growth strategy as well. Our session will feature different presentations from distinguished experts, but also panelists who have been instrumental in driving this green growth agenda across the continent. We also engage with panel discussion to address the challenges, the data as well, but also understanding the green growth indicators, how that was helpful for countries as well. To kick off this, I would like to invite the first speaker, Dr. Kyung-Nam Shim. Dr. Kyung-Nam is currently serving as the Assistant Director General and Head of the Investment and Policy Solution Division at the Global Green Growth Institute. Dr. Shim, the floor is yours.
Dear speakers, panelists, and participants, I would like to welcome you, all of you, to this session on Green Growth Index, measuring green growth performance in Africa. First, published in 2019 by the GGI in collaboration with experts from international organizations, government agencies, and also academic institutions. The annual Green Growth Index continued to serve as a robust past tool for measuring the performance over 150 countries in achieving their sustainable development goals, target, and tracking their transition to green growth. Since 2022, GGI has worked closely with government partners in Africa, including Kenya, Zambia, Ghana, and Togo to develop National Green Growth Index, which has been instrumental in guiding the creation of national green growth strategy and identifying sustainable pipeline of green growth project and investment. This year, GGI is developing Africa LDC Green Growth Index to help assess the challenges and opportunity for green growth transition in this country. We are therefore pleased to have Mr. Evans Enyeza, LDC Chair for UNFCCC, with us today to share his keynote message on his experience working with LDC in Africa to advance climate mitigation adaptation actions in the region. GGI has also started collaborating closely with the African Union Commission to develop green and inclusive green gender index, which will inform the roadmap for the African Union's green recovery plan. GGI takes a participatory approach to developing this index, engaging almost all regional economic communities across Africa in the creation of a gender index framework and identification of gender indicators. After this session, there will be a dedicated session on green and inclusive gender index, during which African Union Commission officials and regional economic community experts will share the experience in developing the index. This session will also include a brief introduction to the gender index, which are like other GGI indices, is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, guided by SDG. GGI believe that the Green Growth Index and related indices are essential for steering the global transition to a global green growth model. As such, we continue to collaborate with international organizations, particularly the custodian of SDG indicator, to pursue this vision. The accuracy and comprehensiveness of SDG indicator directly impact the strength of Green Growth Index in guiding policy and planning. Therefore, it's crucial to address the challenges faced by SDG custodians in providing reliable and comprehensive data. We are very fortunate to have representatives today from the key organizations responsible for developing and coordinating many of the SDG indicators, including Green Growth Index. I encourage all of you to proactively engage with our partner of export from the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, the International Energy Agency, IEA, and the International Telecommunication Union, ITU, by posting your questions and then direct involvement with them. I'm looking forward to presentation and discussion in this session, and thank you so much for all joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Singh, for setting the scene, but also sharing your insight and where you see the how this Green Growth Index is quite important for our member countries as well. I would like also to turn to Helena McLeod. She's our Deputy Director General and Head of the Green Growth Planning and Implementation Division at the Global Green Growth Institute. In this role, she leads over 50 countries operation is spread throughout Latin America, Africa, Asia, Middle East, and Pacific, but also the implementation of the work to achieve the economic green growth. So I think she's in a better place to just tell us a little bit about how countries and member states are seeing those tools and how we can play our role from GGI side. Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It is so lovely to be here today. And this session is in a region very close to my heart, as Mali well knows. So my children are based in South Africa. I've lived and worked in Africa for many years. But the Green Growth Index is our flagship in terms of really measuring what the current status is of green in a country. But it's also really valuable in terms of looking at the dynamic aspect of how far a country has come or not come. And I've had the fortune to go to many different countries in the world, over 35 of our different members. The Green Growth Index is a actually very fundamental part of planning in many different countries. Now, in terms of our country planning framework, that's the strategy that we use in our in our countries to look at how we can work with that country. So it's a 5-year strategy. The Green Growth Index is a cornerstone of that. And what I love about that is it gives us the opportunity to look back as well as looking forward in terms of where we want to help contribute to pushing improvements and how far have we come. Now, it will be interesting to see this afternoon where improvements have been and where improvements still need to happen. But what fascinates me is how it helps us link the local to the national and the global. Now, what I mean by that is, for instance, earlier this year, I was with Mali in Senegal. I was inspired by the new government there. So I came just after the new government had started. Very, very fortunate to go at such a time of change and dynamism. I was taken out to some of our work several hours outside of the capital. This particular work, funded by the Qatar Fund for Development, is inspirational. So we've been working with the Africa Rice Institute to introduce new climate smart rice varieties to farmers, and also turning the diesel power generated pumping system to solar. So solar pumping systems being introduced. The combination of that, we heard from farmers, had actually, the farmer said, or the head of the farmers, doubled the yields. I think it's actually was an improvement between 55 and 88%. But for farmers, that is huge. That's huge. Now, what has happened through our work and the engagement of GGGI Senegal is we've now put that into a fund structure, working with the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Senegal, that's FONSIS, and that work will be scaled through a facility of $50 million US. So you can see again, if you look back at the Uzbekistan bond that we discussed this morning, this is another example of how something very significant in terms of impact is being scaled through innovative application of financial structures and models. And this is what's needed, because to actually move the curve on the Green Growth Index, as in to move one of those indicators from a red to an amber or an amber to a green, that's an economy level shift. So we can't be talking about small projects. That's not enough. We have to be talking about economy-wide level impact. And that's where GGGI is aiming. Now, in terms of gaps and where I think we can still play a fundamental role for LDCs and in Africa more general, we have an initiative called the Africa Safe Initiative. We'll be speaking more about that this week. But in terms of that climate smart agriculture, increasing yields, enabling irrigation in a very water smart way, that is a big area that we can push for. And also recognizing the opportunity of being a major export. I think it's obviously the internal food security, but what you recognize when you live in Africa is just how abundant land is. And in many countries of the world, land is not abundant. But other areas I do believe we can help on, which will help shift the curve, is in the sustainable finance side. So greening the financial sector, yes, introducing the green bonds, but also particularly relevant for LDCs in Africa are the debt for nature swaps. And I know that's something that Mali is working out how to get introduced, looking at the models that are relevant for Africa, because the model of our current debt for nature swap work in Latin America is not directly transferable to Africa. So we're looking at how we can make it transferable to Africa. Now, the gender gap, is that improving? As in, is it getting better? A smaller gender gap in the countries on the continent? In many countries, yes. But what is also very important to recognize is the increase in conflict and instability in some parts of Africa as well. And that plays into our work in many different parts of the world. And it reduces the gains that women have made in most instances. So I'm excited to see what the results of these new indexes will bring. And Lilibeth is such a champion of ours, you know, such a global mastermind on this area. But I will be illuminated to see whether the gender gap has improved, and also where LDCs are in the context of the rest of the world. So this is a lovely session. Thank you for inviting me to speak.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Helena. Thank you also for emphasizing the importance of having data, especially for LDC countries, but also how it's important for our member states to use such tool to just make some, let's say, big and important policy decision making in terms of like helping countries to get to a certain stage. And we realize that in Africa, there's quite a need having, let's say, tools that help the decision maker to make the right decision, especially when it's come to the LDCs countries, and the reason why we start this work in Africa as well. And not only that, also helping to move certain projects at these bigger scales, like the one you mentioned on the climate smart agriculture. And we have also others that we can share during that session as well. And for that, I really would like to introduce Ingvild Solvang, who will be leading the other session for the panel one. Ingvild, she's our Director and Head of Climate Actions and Inclusive Development at the Global Green Growth Institute. So Ingvild, welcome. The floor is yours for moderating the next session. Thank you, Helena. Thanks also, Dr. Shin.
Thank you very much, Malle, and thank you all colleagues and friends online and in the room. It's an honor to be here, so thank you for the warm welcome. I'm here to moderate just the next part of this session, where we are going to zoom in a little bit on GDDI's programs and the ways that we are measuring green growth performance in Africa. So I'm very pleased to welcome 3 speakers for this part, starting with Dr. Malle Fofana. Happy to hear you present on the Africa's Least Developed Countries Green Growth Index.
Thank you very much, Ingvild. Maybe the question people are asking, why you focus on LDC countries? Why also we start the Green Growth Index in Africa in a couple of countries. So when we look at the portfolio in Africa, we target 8 countries that we work closely with Lilibet to start helping those countries to have such tool. And the reason why is following. One, they are low per capita income, which means that the poverty is quite there, in the sense that the economy need to be rebuilt by taking into consideration mainstreaming green growth or different actions so far. The second is linked to the reliance, really relying on agriculture and natural resources, which, as you know, 80% of the employment in Africa is linked to it. And all those LDC countries rely on that, and climate change becoming a big issue and strengthening that particular aspect. The other aspect is just limited access to finance, but also to technology. And that's the reason why they also have lack of data access and no poorly making decision when it's come to, projections, but also having an idea where the country should be in the next 5 to 10 years because of that. And lastly, also the limited of institutional capacity. That's also really hindered the process when it's come to that particular aspect. So working closely with those member states, there was one question they always raise, how we can help us to have the right tool to really inform our decision. How we can have the right tool to really help us to just build a proper projection when it's come to the strategy, but also the policy in the long term as well. And that's why we come up with the Green Growth Index, because that tools help them really to measure the progress toward the system development goals, the SDG as well, because they have to report back against the different commitment regarding Paris Agreement, and such tool will help them to get to that stage. The other element is linked to policy guidance. Most of our member states, as we mentioned, for example, the work was in Rwanda, Ethiopia, Uganda, Senegal, Togo, Burkina, and Zambia, and Mozambique. When we had a chance to discuss with the government, for example, in Mozambique, they tell us that really from our side, we have a national flagship program, but we have a difficulty to make projection in the next 10 years, what the economy should look like, but also with the incoming climate threat, how we can have something solid. And regarding the complexity of the context, we need to have a complex tool that can help us to make such decision forward, right? And that's why they ask us to how we can help them to have policy guidance documents come to the measurement of the index so far. And there's also something that the Green Growth Index help also to address is the data gaps. Most of the countries, they have issues collecting the right data, but also when they collect the right data, how they can consolidate the data, because the indicators are not really robust as well. And the process that linked to it require a lot of, let's say, capacity building, both at the individual level, but also at the institutional level. So I will work with the Gringo Index, not only using, let's say, in-house expertise, but we're trying also to build the capacity of the member state and also the key institutional to just understand how they can use such tool to develop their policy in country as well. And that's why we help countries to just really identify those gaps, and with the collaboration of international partner, but also local institution, aim to just improve the data availability. And that's why we work closely with those countries. And lastly, also is just promoting inclusive growth, because when you have such tools, when it's come to Gringo Index, that will help countries to see this is probably the way I have to mainstream green growth in my current policy. And that require really understanding the poverty reductions, but also how inclusive that will, including gender part as well, to such tool. When we look at the case of Kenya, recently we finalized the Gringo Index. There was a couple of comments saying that this is the first time from their side they really have, let's say, better view what is mean of green growth and how green growth is really inclusive by including gender, but also poverty reductions. And the new tool that we developed as an index serve as a model for Kenya government to start now building their own green growth strategy. So which is really a starting phase from that particular aspect. So the fact that we work on those LDC will help us also to compare those LDC, the group of the LDC countries in Africa, or the other peers as well, you know, how they really progressing, what are the level of progression, how they can compare themselves to other LDC countries outside Africa as well, to see if there's any gap in the area of improvement and help them to get to such things. So I think from our side, that was really demand driven, because the country raised the, let's say, the necessity to have such tools, and we come up with the solution with the Gringo Index, and also being more inclusive, inclusive as well. And that's thing for us, for the region, starting with those 8 countries, just the phase 1, and we're aiming to just scaling up that in other countries because the demand is here. And I think we just see also the result with the different engagement from the member states, and that's why we think that the LDC countries was quite important. And as you know, there's a lot of climate window that are coming that targeting really LDC countries like Loss and Damage Fund. Knowing exactly where they are when it's come to green growth journey will be helpful for them to make great decisions for the future. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Male, for that. Really, and I think what you're highlighting here is really how these indexes really is a metric of indicators that defines green growth, and it does so in a very interactive and engaging way that builds capacity at the same time and creates the ownership and maybe also that confidence for policy making in LDC countries by identifying the opportunities and maybe sharing common challenges amongst these countries that can then be addressed more effectively by an international community and through flows of finance. So I think that was really good. Now there is maybe also a little bit about our ability to understand also the level of green growth, the state of green growth in a specific region. So I would like to hand it to Dr. Lilibet Acosta, our great colleague, who is also, I must say, a mastermind behind our Green Growth Index. The amount of thought that she has poured into the Global Green Growth Institute's work on these indexes is really tremendous, and it has been really, truly fun and inspiring to watch that evolve over through the last few years. So I would like to hand it to you, Lilibet, to speak a bit to how does Africa perform against the rest of the world when you look at the results of these Green Growth Index?
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? I hope you can hear me well. So I'm just trying to share my screen. Can you see it? Okay, perfect. I'll just put it presentation mode. So good day to all of you, wherever you are, to our audience who are joining online. I will give you a background a bit on the Green Growth Index, particularly focusing on the Africa LDC performance. But first, let me introduce to you, for those who are not familiar with the Green Growth Index, what the framework is all about. So it has 4 dimensions: efficient and sustainable resource use, green economic opportunities, social inclusion, and natural capital protection Each dimension has 4 pillars, and each pillars has 3 to 5 indicators depending on the applications. So here you can see we have already published 5 annual reports of the Global Green Growth Index. And the very first one was in 2019. And the experts that you see here, many of them have participated in confirming or validating the framework, but they also continue to join the annual review of the Global Green Growth Index report. And one of our panel experts today is part of this international expert group. I will introduce him to you later. So these are the LDCs covered in the Green Growth Index, but you can see here the Caribbean and Pacific LDCs have no index score due to a lack of data. And I'll explain later why we cannot compute the index scores for them. Now let me go to the African LDCs performance, focusing on the GGI members, but also comparing to other LDCs in Africa and Asia. So as Mali said, the 8 LDCs where we are focusing are Burkina Faso, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Rwanda, Senegal, Togo, Uganda, and Zambia. And you can see that throughout the year from 2010 up to the present or last year, that the performance has been increasing over time with Rwanda showing the fastest increase. Uganda and Rwanda has reached above 70 scores. So usually if its score is 100, it means the SDG targets have been achieved because most of the indicators we are including in the index are SDG indicators, because we can use the SDG as sort of a basis, a baseline to benchmark the performance of the countries. So far, Burkina Faso was the lowest scoring among these 8 countries. Comparing at the regional level, we can see that Africa LDCs, all in all, have lower performance than the Asia LDCs. But surprisingly, you can see that the 8 African LDCs have higher performance than the Asia LDCs. This is because Afghanistan is pulling down the scores for Asia. But of course, I also would like to highlight here that these results are still preliminary because our country colleagues in these 8 countries are still collaborating or consulting with our government partners because they would like to be involved in validating the indicators for this index. So here are 8 indicators, preliminary indicators that we are including in the Africa LDC index. You can see for these 8 countries, social inclusion is the most challenging dimension for them, where we can see that access to basic services, the ABs, and few social protection, SP, so that's SP1 and SP2, they have scores below 40. Which is low or very low. Now, let us look at the green growth indicators data availability, because this is very important. When we assess the index scores, we have to always think about what is the data availability, and I will tell you why we have to consider that. So here you can see the data availability for the average data availability for the 8 African LDCs from 2010 to 2023. So here, SP is the social protection and GN is the green innovation. You can see that the data availability is very low here. So there's really a big data gap. So why are we checking? So if you look at our interactive websites for different countries, for Global Green Growth Index, and eventually also for the LDC Index, you will see that we are going to show the confidence level. This is very important because when interpreting the results, you always have to attach the confidence levels to that score. Because if the confidence level is very low, we cannot really say that these countries are performing very well into the future. So here you can see also, it's not just for the 8 countries, for the African LDCs, Asian LDCs, Caribbean LDC, Pacific LDCs, there are lots of data gaps across the different countries. And you see here, particularly for Caribbean and the Pacific, we were not able to compute the index scores because for Caribbean, you see the GT it's very low. It's data availability is below 10%. And GT is the green trade. It's one of the green economic opportunities pillar, where we have 5 indicators. And then the same for Pacific LDCs. For green innovation, the data is very low. The thing here is that if the data availability is very low, that means we will not probably have a score. So for this Caribbean and Pacific, we did not have a score for green economic opportunities because one of the pillars is missing. And so if one dimension has no score, we are not computing the green growth index scores, because it means that we are giving equal weights to these 4 dimensions. So one missing index score will mean there is no index scores, although for the different dimensions, maybe they have scores. So this will be the very important topic that we would like to discuss later with our panel experts. So what can we do? Okay, what are the challenges that they are facing in terms of collecting the data, especially SDGs? Because the data that we have included here is at least 70% are SDG indicators. So we have to do something to address these data gaps, whether it's at the international level, regional level, or at the national level. And with this, I would like to thank you for listening on behalf of my team supporting the development of the Green Growth Index. Thank you very much. Back to you, Ingvild.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lilibeth. I think that was a good way of showing also how a bit of that technical nature and the thought that goes behind the selection of the right types of indicators that are useful, in fact, for policy making in essence, and the challenges of data gaps that I think we will return to a little bit later also in this session, because that is really, really critical. So before then, I would like to welcome another GDGI colleague, Ms. Hohit Seyom Gebrexiabher. Are you online, Hohit? I hope so. I will hand it over to you to speak about the Africa Regional Economic Communities Green and Inclusive Gender Index. So the way in which we have actually tried to also apply a stronger focus on the inclusive and gender inclusive aspect of the Green Growth Index in your work there. Over to you, Hohit. Can you hear us, Hohit? Hello?
Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, Hohit. It's great to hear your voice. I'll try to
hear
hand
me
it
now,
over to you.
Ingvild?
Please go ahead.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, sorry. Okay, perfect. Apology, I'm not a good technical person, so I get lost with these things. Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, colleagues who are joining from different parts of the world. Thank you very much for considering me as part of this session. So as my colleague Ingvild has said, I'll be talking about the Green and Inclusive Gender Index that we are developing as part of the Transformative Climate Finance Program of the AU Green Recovery Action Plan. So we are developing a continent-wide Green and Inclusive Gender Index with the regional economic communities under the guidance of the Africa Union Commission. Maybe to give a bit of context, I'll talk about what AU Green Recovery Action Plan is. So the AU Green Recovery Action Plan, in short AU-GRAP, was conceptualized to respond to the COVID-19 crisis and its social and economic impact. So the initiative aims to promote green recovery and building an inclusive, resilient economy in alignment with regional and global agenda, including the Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. So the AU-GRAP focuses on 5 thematic pillars: climate finance, renewable energy, biodiversity and nature-based solutions, sustainable agriculture, and green and resilient cities, with a focus on water. Our program, the Transformative Climate Finance Program, was launched with the funding support of the Government of Canada to support the first phase of the AU-GRAP operationalization focusing on the thematic area of the climate finance. It takes a gender-responsive approach to address climate finance, and its goal is really to help unlock accessibility and improve climate finance for Africa's most vulnerable regions and communities by giving a special focus to women and youth. So this program, GGI is co-implementing it with Africa Union Commission, the African Capacity Building Foundation, and we are in the first phase working with the first cohort of member states, which includes Cote d'Ivoire, Ethiopia, Lesotho, Namibia, Rwanda, Senegal, and Zambia, and then 3 regional economic communities, COMESA, Common Market for East and Southern Africa, EAC, East Africa Community, and SADC, Southern Africa Development Communities, which are the pilot poles for implementing economic transformation. So just to point,
if I may ask you, just to ask you whether you are changing your slides, in which case
I will change in a second. I will change in a second.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate. So just to point that we had a high interest from other member states, but since this is a pilot phase, the plan is to replicate this pilot gender inclusive and gender responsive and inclusive climate finance solutions to other interested member states and regs. So next slide, Kautar, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yeah, so to strengthen the African Union capacity to implement the AU GRAB, again, as I mentioned earlier, we are developing with AUC a toolbox that will support the gender responsive implementation of the AU GRAB priority areas I mentioned earlier. So as part of this toolbox, we are currently at the early stage of co-development of a continent-wide green and inclusive gender index using the regional economic communities as entry points. The 3 regs I mentioned, COMESA, EAC, and SADC are part of it. And in addition, there is ECOWAS, Economic Communities of West Africa State, ECAS, Economic Communities of Central Africa States, and UMA, Union du Maghreb Arab, that are part of this process. So the index will support to track the various dimensions of gender and social inclusion in green growth efforts. It helps to monitor the experience and contribution that women, men, and youth do in each of the AU thematic areas, with climate finance being transversal. So in addition as well, this index will play a crucial role to track progress and inform green recovery efforts across Africa through the gender responsive and inclusive climate finance approach. So this index was developed based on the flagship GGI Green Growth Index that was presented by my colleague, Dr. Lilibet, and it also factors in the AU GRAB priorities to support the measurement of a country's progress in achieving sustainability targets, which also includes SDG and Paris Agreement. So just to speak a little bit about the co-design process, as I mentioned, we are at the very early stage of the index co-development. So we started off by conducting a gender index gap and assessment through desk reviews. And following that, we developed a draft framework. We then convened our first regional consultation workshop in Addis Ababa in July of this year, in the presence of the experts from the regional economic communities that I mentioned. And also we've invited other international partners, including UN Women, Africa Risk Capacity, and UNECA. The purpose of this consultation was to socialize the green and inclusive gender index framework and indicators. So the socialization was really done to ensure that we incorporate diverse regional perspective and also ensure contextualization and relevance of the index to the implementation sites of the AU GRAB, and also to align with other regional framework. So as you can see on the diagram here, this is the draft conceptual framework that was developed through iterative process and participatory approach, with regs driving the approach. So the index has 2 dimensions. The first dimension is the gender contribution to a green economy. which focuses on capitalizing on women's important role as green entrepreneurs and natural resource stewards to transition the region into green economy. So this dimension has 3 pillars: the climate mitigation action, nature-based adaptation, and resilient food system. The second dimension is the gender benefits of an inclusive society, and that focuses on ensuring women's access to resources, to enhance their capability and skills, and then allowing them to transition into the green economy and giving them equal opportunities. So the dimension 2 encompasses, again, 3 pillars. There is the knowledge and digital transformation, green finance and entrepreneurship, and access to social services and protection. And under each pillar, for each dimension, there are indicators, as you can see on the diagram, and the regional economic communities, they deliberated on all the suggested indicators with data to confirm whether it has policy relevance. So next slide, please, Kautar. Thank you so much. Yeah, so additionally, the RECs also proposed including a 3rd pillar, which is called an enabling environment. And this is a cross-cutting dimension and will have 3 pillars, which focuses on 1, peace and security, 2nd, climate governance, and 3rd, youth employment. So this is to ensure women's active participation and benefits in the green economy. So this is, in short, how our Green and Inclusive Gender Index looks like. So maybe just to outline where we are at in terms of the process and the next steps. Next slide, please, Kautar. Is it coming? Yeah. Okay, you are at the next steps for the design process? Okay, perfect. Sorry, it's not popping on my side, that's why. Thank you so much, Kautar, I appreciate. So as you can see on the top diagram of the slide, we have the workflow of the index co-design process. As mentioned earlier, we started off with the index gap assessment. That is the step 1. And then we followed into drafting a framework. Then we conducted the first consultation with the RECs and the international partners to kind of socialize the GIGI. Again, after that, the next step is an extension of this first consultation, where the regional economic communities are going to their constituencies to socialize the framework. So this is a very critical step for us, where they are currently further in discussion with regional experts to ensure that the index reflects the diverse realities and unique priorities of each region, and also to enable us that the index we're developing can allow us to collect the right data that RECs need. So it's really, this process is also to give the index meaning and to ensure that we can implement context-specific green growth policy action. After the consultations are done, we will do the data collection and indicator aggregation, which will be followed by an online validation process, which will take place together with the RECs and the international partners that we are working with, UN Women, UNECA, and Africa Risk Capacity. And the final step of this co-designing process is co-authoring a technical report, again with the RECs. The reason why we are emphasizing on co-development, co-validation and co-authoring is to facilitate institutionalization and also sustainability of this index. So we will be producing a technical report together with the RECs, and then after that, we'll be launching the report. So at the bottom, you'll see examples of similar projects for selected countries in the region, just to give you what other work that DGI has done. In the phase 2 of GRAB program, as I have mentioned, we are planning to replicate the pilot results of the phase 1 work. And then in the phase 2, the thinking is to domesticate this index to selected African countries, particularly by engaging national experts and then selecting and validating gender indexes. So we are thinking, we start off with the continent level index, and then we downscale it at national level with the interested member states to develop a national index. I'll stop here, Ingvild, but maybe I just want to mention to our audience here that there is another session on the Green and Inclusive Gender Index for the African Union Green Recovery Action Plan, where we will be deep diving on the actual index and the process of the development. And it starts at 1900 Korean Standard Time, or in my time zone, 1300 East Africa time. I thank you, and I pass back the mic to you, Ingvild. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Rohit. I believe that is in 2 hours from now that there will be a session specifically dedicated to the Green, Inclusive and Gender Index. So with that, I think I would like to hand it back to Dr. Lilibet Acosta. That concludes this part of the session, where we've seen a few examples of how these indexes support policy making in different areas. So Lilibet, over to you.
Thank you very much, Ingvild. So as I have already mentioned to you during my presentation, we should be mindful of the SDG data gaps. So now we have invited 3 prominent institutions and, of course, experts from these institutions who will help us understand the challenges they are confronting in terms of data collection and improving the SDG databases. So we have 3 panel experts. So let me start with Dr. Francesco Tudiello. He is a senior statistician at the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organizations, or FAO, who leads the collection and analysis of countries' agri-environmental data for dissemination in FAO Stat. Francesco also serves as focal point for data collection for SDG Indicator 2.4.1 on productive and sustainable agriculture. So this is a very important indicator for the index. He provides data and methodological support to 2030 SDGs and UNFCCC monitoring and reporting processes. And so Francesco has also been part of the international expert group since 2019. And he has been supporting us every year on the review of the index and also providing databases from FAO. And then we will also have Mrs. Saskia Adam. Is a statistics manager in the Energy Data Center of the International Energy Agency, or IEA. She works on national data capacity, supporting countries in strengthening their ability to produce sound energy statistics for tracking energy transitions. Saskia has 15 years of experience working on statistical projects both on the OECD and IEA. We are using lots of IEA databases in the index, so it's very, very important that we have Saskia in this panel. Then finally, we have Dr. Rosie McDonald. She is a climate change officer within the Telecommunication Development Bureau at the International Telecommunication Union, or ITU. She coordinates efforts in green digital transformation by providing research, tools, and capacity building to address environmental challenges related to climate change and e-waste. Her work focuses on monitoring greenhouse gas emissions and climate commitments of the ICT industry. And as you know, we are also going AI. And we are going to check also in the future what are the AI indicators that should be considered in terms of our Green Growth Index. We are already using it in relation to the Green Growth Simulation tool, which is linked to the index. Please listen tomorrow to the AI session. And you will see that the role of ITU is very important in this, and we are looking forward to working with the ITU in the future. And so with this, I will go now to the questions. to our experts, and I will have them answer the questions one by one. The first question is that I have already mentioned that we are using many SDG indicators, and they are benchmarked against the SDG targets, where the highest score will be 100 if the SDG target is achieved. So in Africa, what do you think are the main challenges in achieving the SDG targets? So this is the first question, and maybe the simplest for you to answer. So maybe we can start with our colleague, maybe from FAO first, and then we can have ITU, and then from the IEA. So.
Thank you, Lilibeth. Good afternoon to you, colleagues, and thank you for your invitation to sit on this panel. I listened with interest to the previous presentations. Maybe let me focus my answer from an FAO angle, where SDG Goal 2 is the one that is closest to our mandate across the various dimensions of sustainability, but certainly socioeconomic and then environmental. So target 2 focuses on zero hunger, right? And sustainability of agriculture in terms of, additional impacts on environment and impacts from the changing environment that we are witnessing through climate change. So we have 2 major reports that work in this area. You may be familiar with the State of Food Insecurity, which we publish every year. And there we report on the 2 indicators that are related to hunger, the prevalence of undernourishment, which you also use in GGI, and the FSE, Food Security Experience Scale. And unfortunately there, as you may have read through many of the reports that we put out, but also to our other agencies and generally in the press, the reaching the SDG target of zero hunger is considering that we're 6 years away from the 2030 goal. It's quite far. And in fact, in part due to a number of extreme events, not just only in climate, but in geopolitics, starting with COVID and then with the flaring of conflicts around the world, which have created a number of roadblocks to free trade of goods, but also provision of inputs. That target is actually going in the wrong direction and only not proceeding, let's say, with the required speed. On the environment dimension, which is the one that I'm more directly responsible for. So you mentioned SDG 241, which is the proportion of agriculture that is productive and sustainable. The picture looks slightly better. We have begun reporting our global and regional storylines this year, and we report the world as a whole as moderate in terms of our qualifiers in reaching a target of sustainability, again, with several limiting factors, but going back to Africa, and this is something that we see also in our basic data collection, we are further from the rest of the regions. And perhaps I'll deal with the data issue a bit later in the question and answer part, and I leave the floor to my colleagues.
Thank you, Francesco. Can we have Sakya to answer the same question?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to participate in this panel. So on this first question on what are the main challenges in achieving the SDG targets in Africa. So based on our recent data analysis, we see that many countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, they are not on track to achieve their SDG 7 commitments by 2030. While we have seen some positive developments, the overall progress is not sufficient to meet the 2030 targets. For example, for the SDG 7.1, which is about ensuring universal electricity access and clean cooking solutions, the number of people without access to electricity has increased for the first time since in 2022 over the past decade, as populations grew mostly in sub-Saharan Africa at a higher rate than that of new electricity connections. Also for clean cooking, our data for 2022 have shown that more than 2.1 billion people still rely on polluting fuels and technologies. So for Africa, the main challenges that we see is that there's a lack of electrification plans, and also data are not regularly tracked in a way that we are able to track progress for SDGs. So the lack of data is a real challenge for us. Also, there's the big population growth in sub-Saharan Africa, where we see that population growth outpaces the rate of new electricity connections. And also the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2022 energy crisis have significantly slowed progress, and these crises have reversed some of the advances made in energy access in Africa. So this is a few of the challenges that I wanted to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zakia. So can we hear from Rosie?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invite to speak at this panel session today. So I think globally countries are making progress towards their SDG goals, but the pace very much varies by country. And if I zoom in the area of e-waste and ICT sector, greenhouse gas emissions and energy use, advancements have been made in recent years in setting targets, measuring outcomes, thanks to efforts like organisations like ITU, IEA, etc. But large gaps still very much remain. For ITU, we are looking at, especially looking at the impact of ICT's contribution to climate, and looking at some concrete indicators here. So looking at how to measure e-waste recycling rate, the number of countries with e-waste legislation, the contribution of the ICT sector to global greenhouse gas emissions. So there are specific challenges which have slowed down this progress of achieving these environmental targets. And I think that links to standardized methodologies for measuring e-waste. There is one developed by the United Nations Partnership on Measuring ICT for Development, but is not yet uniformly applied and implemented by institutes across all African nations. This lack of data then makes it challenging to monitor progress and put in place targets over time. We also found that our organization, we also produce the Global E-Waste Monitor, and here we track regulations, legislation. So many countries in Africa lack a comprehensive e-waste management policy, like regulation or legislation. And without that, this often leads to sometimes the informal sector handling this waste and this information. So you're not being able to track and trace all your flows of e-waste there as well. And I think also to highlight the growing demand of digital services, it very much increases energy consumption, and it's often difficult to get renewable energy sources in some countries. So that also turns up and drives greenhouse gas emissions. So limited access to energy also impacts, I think, the overall monitoring of that kind of source of emissions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Yeah, indeed, we actually would like to, we are including waste management in the index, and e-waste is really becoming an important issue, especially for Africa, of course, because when the developed countries shifting their e-waste to Africa, such things, such stories. So I think in the future, it would be very good if we could have a better SDG databases for such indicators. Now for the second question, I think this the most challenging, perhaps for you as custodians of SDG, how do you work with the governments to collect the SDG databases? What are the challenges you encounter, particularly in Africa? You can, of course, give an example of an SDG indicator to answer the question. We can start again with Francesco, and then next Sakia, and then Rosie. Go ahead, Francesco.
Thank you, Lilibeth. I'll add maybe my answer also part of the work on methodological activities that we do with countries. But so as I feel, as you know, and I make the example of the SDG 241 that I am directly working with on productive and sustainable agriculture, but I also wanted to bring the attention on the fact that it's the basic data, some of your presentations already highlighted, that are lacking. So issues in basic data that then enter the machinery of a more complex indicator is where the game of trying to figure out how to improve the state of knowledge is. So for example, we are engaged, so our member countries, by virtue or the agreement when they join as member countries of FAO are in a sense required to provide data to FAO on agriculture and food systems whenever required. And in my case, we send out questionnaires every year. We send out annual questionnaires on basic data, so fertilizers, use of pesticides, land use, which then are analyzed and disseminated in FAOSTAT. And then we have begun on SDG 241 also in sending a questionnaire to countries as a first entry point to at least, that serves us as a first metric to understand where countries stand in their data readiness. And across the board, what we measure is, we call it response rate or reporting rate, meaning the number of questionnaires we receive with actual data in them, as opposed to a response that basically just says, we're here ready to engage. They're very low across the board. Globally, we are between 40 and 50%. And so then you can imagine the kind of work that we do for the rest of the year in my team in trying to fill the data gaps with any source available, either alternative government sources, remote sensing increasingly, and the like. But for Africa, the situation is even more critical, where our reporting rates are in the range of 10 to 20%. That means 10 or 20% of the 50 plus countries that receive questionnaires from us are actually sending back to us questionnaires with data. Now, if I might just add a particular, so the entry point there for us is, of course, robust and sustained within the availability of funding of capacity development with experts in the country, with the relevant line agencies to reach out and provide knowledge for the improvement of data collection. We have large externally funded projects. You might have heard of a project that's called 50 by 2030, which has a particular focus in Africa, funded by many agencies, including the World Bank, the Gates Foundation, and so on and so forth, where the goal is to arrive at least at 50 countries globally, but many of those are in Africa, being able to report at some level, compare with the metrics that I just discussed by 2030 on their SDG commitment. And I close from our side, what we've done, we've also tried to facilitate and simplify the methodologies that belie the reporting process. In particular on 241, that SDG belongs to a family of SDGs where the data collection, the initial methodology required a very detailed farm level, development of a farm level survey system, which of course is very expensive, and countries are not there at the moment, and that was part of the reason why we were getting very little data on 241. So we worked with countries over the last 2 years to develop something that looks more like the spirit of the GGI. So analysis directly at country level with national level data. So we now have a proxy for SDG 241 that spans the 3 dimensions of socioeconomic and environment, tries to cover a minimum of 7 indicators in total to try to begin a comprehensive analysis of the status of productive and sustainable agriculture throughout the world. And so using that, we've begun to produce a storyline this year. But using that, we will do significant capacity development activity and reach out to countries to explain that they can use a first simplified entry point method to begin reporting at least something on the state of their agricultural systems. Over to you and colleagues.
Thank you, Francesco. Sakya?
Thank you. So the IEA has been working with governments to collect the SDG databases through on many fronts. So first on capacity building and technical assistance. So we have at the IEA several capacity building programs to help countries develop robust energy data collection systems. And this includes training government officials and statisticians on data collection methodologies and the use of energy data for policymaking. We have several programs to support countries in improving their energy data, such as the Sub-Saharan Africa program, which was a 5-year program that started in 2020 and ended just now in 2024. We also have developed several guidebooks to help countries develop better track policies. So just recently, we released an energy statistics guidebook that for the first time describes the key components of energy data systems and provides recommendations to countries to strengthen them. It provides a comprehensive framework for developing and accessing national energy data. We also release a guidebook for improved electricity access statistics that focuses on the methodologies using readily available supply-side data from electric utilities, mini-grid operators, and off-grid system distributors. We also work with countries on the implementation of surveys to gather detailed data. For example, under the Sub-Saharan Africa program, we supported Nigeria in establishing a new household survey, and now we are planning a survey for the industry sector. We also work in partnerships with many international organizations, such as the United Nations Statistics Divisions and the World Bank, to produce comprehensive reports, such as the annual tracking SDG 7 progress report. Regarding the challenges that we encounter with in Africa, first, I think the main challenge is in Africa, it's the lack of reliable and comprehensive energy data, especially for biomass, which is very difficult to collect data for. Many countries do not have regular and systematic data collection processes, leading to data gaps and inconsistencies in the energy data. Also in Africa, national statistical officers and energy ministries, they often face resource constraint, human, financial, technical lack of resources, and this is really a challenge for them to collect data and make good analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakya. Rosie?
Thank you. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Yes, of course. So how do you work with the government to collect the SDG databases? And what are the challenges you encounter, particularly in Africa, if you are working in Africa for those databases? And you can give an example of an SDG indicator.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so ITU collaborates closely with many governments, especially to establish a harmonized data collection methodologies to SDGs related to e-waste especially, and we're working to advance on the area related to ICT sector greenhouse gas emissions and energy use as well. This has, over the last few years, involved developing international guidelines and building national capacities for monitoring e-waste flows. And a key challenge that I guess we've encountered, especially in Africa nations, is the lack of reliable data and the varying levels of data collection maturity. For instance, in the case of the SDG indicator 12.5.1, which is for e-waste formerly collected and recycled, some countries struggle to accurately track the amount of e-waste being processed just due to limited resources, the regulation frameworks, or inadequate reporting systems. So this gap complicates efforts to create and recycling programs and hinder the establishment of national databases here to especially align with the global measurement approaches. Drawn an example from one of the projects we had in place. So we had working with the YACO Secretariat in East Africa, ITU and the UNITAR S-Cycle program provided technical assistance to various countries on a project specifically designed to harmonise e-waste data collection. So the project supported the overall goals of a e-waste management strategy in the region, and we basically developed a baseline survey for households and businesses to collect data on e-waste. We supported national statistic bodies to collect and improve their data in a harmonised manner, and then also provided support to validate the country data and providing comparable results. So that's an approach that we take in many countries, and I think taking a regional approach really helps to help share knowledge. Different stakeholders can help each other, especially. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Rosie. So we still have like 10 minutes, not more than 10 minutes, because we would like to hand over to Ingvild later. So if I still have one last question. If you can just keep your answer very concise for this. So Sakya has already actually answered a bit, but maybe she can still elaborate a bit. So how can other international organizations could support your challenges in overcoming data collection and improving SDG databases? So what kind of strategic approach of collaboration are you following? You can also, of course, mention the international organizations if you like. Okay, so maybe we can start this time with Sakya, and then we have Rosie, and then Francesco.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think that if we can have facilitated partnerships between governments, utilities, and international organizations to share data and also share best practices, that would be very useful. Also, I think that if we can also work together on the implementation of pilot projects to support countries in collecting and refining data collection methodologies, which then we can scale it up for other countries as well. This would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakya. Rosie?
Thank you. Yeah, I think also there's often a gap, especially at the end of a project or a training, that we often have is how do we make it more sustainable long term for many countries, governments, especially. So I think there's a lot we can do there to make it a bit more long term in terms of funding needed, technical skills, ensuring that the capacity building continues after, say, a UN type program ends. And I think just facilitating also access to better digital technologies and record keeping and digitizing some services also can make a big difference with overall data gathering, data hosting as well. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rosie. Francesco?
Yes, thank you, Lilibeth. Well, we already benefit from the exchange of many experts across agencies, and in particular also your group, Lilibeth, as you know, benefit there. I mean, a sharing of or an ongoing sharing on methods, but also, you know, plain quality control, quality assurance as we use each other's data. And that's very useful because we have limited resources and not so many people in our team. So the more the better, sort of. So we've been experiencing there, and I think it would be ongoing and positive. Where I think we could add value is, as I said before, we need to reach systematically out more and more countries. So on capacity development activities where we could find you know, mutual benefits for action. And what I say there, one of the main gaps that we find in reaching out to countries is that the national level is then fragmented across you know, a number of agencies. So we talk usually to the ministries of agriculture, sometimes to the Ministry of Environment, and other agencies have, you know, directly link into a university expert or another line ministry. So I think they are designing projects where we can jointly go to countries of choice and bring it to the table, around the table, more experts that, you know, sort of institutionally already talk to us, but bring them together, that could add a lot of value in the country, finding the internal mechanisms to improve moving forward on improving their data quality. So yeah, that's, for me, would be an added value that we could investigate.
Thank you, Francesco. Indeed, Francesco highlighted the very important collaboration of CGI with FAO because we were really needing some indicators before on sustainable agriculture, and at that time in 2019 or 2020, nowhere to find in the SDG database, and Francesco really helped us a lot to provide something on that. And so we are actually also hoping, working with the IEA and ITU, that we will be able to identify together what are the indicators, particularly because we are working with the governments also. And through this participatory process of developing the index, we give them the opportunity to choose the indicators that we would like to use. That is in contrast to the Global Green Growth Index, where we are asking the international experts. But as soon as we develop the National Green Growth Index, we ask the governments, what indicators do you like? And there is a ministerial cross-sectoral line agencies contributing to the identification. We usually have 45 experts from more than 25 institutions in the country. And so we are starting actually to have a good list of indicators that we cannot find, or we cannot find complete databases in the UN SDG databases. And in the future, I think this is something also that we can support the international organization to say that this is where the data gaps are, so that the custodians will be mindful of these data gaps. Because the index is just as good as the inputs that get into it, right? And so if we work together to have a really very good databases, and then I think we will be able to provide the governments a really robust policy tool. And I think with this, I will give the floor to Ingvild. There are a few questions in the chat. I will start answering them now because they're related to the data and about the methods and things like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lilibet, and all the speakers. And I also have noticed these questions in the chat. I also remember the opening remark of Dr. Shin. So I would actually like to ask Dr. Shin, after having listened to the conversation, do you want to link back to your opening statement just before I close the session? Please.
Thank you, Lilibet. Thank you, Ingvild. I think this is very much productive, very much comprehensive discussion. If you go to Africa, for instance, have a chance to talk with stakeholders, government agencies. What kind of project you prefer us to work for you? The answer is very simple, Nexus. Nexus comprises energy, food, and wastewater. And then this session is very much productive. Reason why we have a very strong partners from FAO, UN, and then IEA, the data collection, analysis, ITU. So I think this is like a great a session. Very much expect to collaborate with all these our respectable international organization. So data collection and analysis is very important starting point. People saying that, oh, you may need also strong ownership from the government stakeholders And then also we need like some kinds of strong like need assessment. Yes, indeed. But data collection and analysis, the first starting point, people move to next stage. Identification, their needs, need assessment, strong ownership, and then now like developing nice project design, finance match. The first starting point will be data collection and analysis. In this league, I'm very much sure about that. We are very much the right direction now to collaborate with three international organizations and try to get more like strong potential areas to enhance our next step. So I'm very happy to open the floor. Thank you so much. I'm very much I learned a lot from today's session. I'm very happy to find a best solution from our side to support this very amazing drive from DGGI side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shin. I think that was actually a great way of summarizing a very, very rich conversation that we've had today. I think it is exactly what Dr. Shin says. It is about that nexus. It is about understanding the interconnectedness of the different elements and dimensions of green growth. And by doing so, also identifying and defining what green growth is in the different national context to bring in the confidence in the policy making. And as has been highlighted in the conversation and throughout the conversation, the lack of data and the data gaps is a major challenge to accurate, effective, efficient decision-making that brings the finance flows to where finance is needed along that value chain that I think Dr. Shin also points to. So it is really, really critical. And I'm particularly happy to hear from our wonderful partners in FAO, IEA, and ITU today about also those initiatives that are in place to raise and build capacity for data gathering, because that is really, really critical to planning and to guiding this transition towards green growth that we are trying to do here, right? Now, and on the use of these indexes, as has been highlighted in the experiences of working with indexes, it shows the interconnectedness of the different dimension of something as complex as green growth. It brings in that confidence element to, for example, how do we address gender in the transition to green growth? It is a very challenging thing to do. The index helps bring in that analytical lens to it that provides us with the confidence to see how women, men, boys, girls are engaging, participating, and benefiting from green growth interventions and climate action. So I think that it's an example of how these indexes are really, really helpful, and what has been pointed to here as well, which I find maybe the most exciting about this whole toolbox that we have in DGGI, which we call sort of this index toolbox that is under Lilibet's leadership, is how we use this as maybe more, first and foremost, as an engagement tool, as a way to start the conversation, as a way to bring the stakeholders together and identify what is the meaningful definition of green growth in our context, agree on the indicators, understand where the gaps are and where the gaps needs to be filled, and use that to build ownership for what then comes out of the exercise, which is these robust green growth plans, right? So with that, I thank everyone, particularly our colleagues from FAO, IEA, and ITU. Thank you so much for joining the session today and for your continued support and partnership. And thank you also to all our colleagues from DGGI who are here and online, and to all the participants, everyone who's been actively engaged in the chat as well. I hope you've had some answers to your questions. Lilibet nods. If not, feel free to stay in touch. And with that, I wish you all a continued evening or day forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very good.